Check, check, mic check. Check, check, mic check. Welcome to Podcast Envy. I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Klender. This is episode 82, and today I'm bringing you a mini interviewing masterclass and a short session in persevering during a pandemic, aka The Show Must Go On, with producer and host of To Dine For, Kate Sullivan. If you don't know To Dine For, allow me to make your acquaintance. Season 3 is airing now on PBS online. Seasons 1 and 2 can be viewed there or on Amazon Prime. And the podcast is available in whatever app you are using to listen to me now. And for your convenience, I've linked it all up for you in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimposter.com/PodEnvy082. You'll want to check out To Dine For to find out the favorite restaurants of socially minded creators like ballerina Misty Copeland, founder of Spanx Sarah Blakely, filmmaker M. Night Shyamalan, author Kevin Kwan, and more. But what I'm most curious about as a podcaster is how you put a guest at ease and get them to open up while simultaneously asking them to eat and talk on camera. Well, you'll find out in the episode. If you love hearing from Kate here, you'll want to pop over to our companion episode on the creative imposter, linked in the show notes, of course, to hear even more behind-the-scenes insights. Now, before we jump in, I want you to pay specific attention when Kate reveals her primary intention for her audience when they watch or listen to Dine For, and then think about how you do or don't do the same for your audience. And now, with no further ado, I give you Kate Sullivan. Kate Sullivan from To Dine For. Thank you so much for joining me on Podcast Envy.
This is so fun. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you came into my awareness by way of reaching out, looking for podcasts to come on as a guest to promote the new season, the third season of the show To Dine For. And I honestly did not know about the show. I had not heard of it. I didn't know about the TV show or the podcast. And I'm so glad that I do now. I've been binging the podcast and watched a few old episodes of the show.
Thank you.
Where did this idea come from?
It all started when I wanted to create a television show around people's favorite restaurant. I myself am slightly obsessed with great restaurants. I love to travel. So whenever I go to a new city, I love to find that most amazing restaurant to eat at. That idea of going to great restaurants and eating with all sorts of fascinating people, it was always an idea in the back of my head. It was not fleshed out. It wasn't a solid idea that had been given a lot of thought to. But it was one that I felt really passionately about, and I always felt like I would get to down the road. To me, food tells a story, and where someone chooses as their absolute favorite restaurant tells a story. And the idea came about when I asked myself a very simple question, and that is, if I could do anything I wanted to do for work and get paid for it, what would that look like?
Did you know at the outset that you were going to pitch public television as the outlet for this show, or how did that decision come to be?
Yeah, no, I didn't at all. I didn't know where the show would go. When I first started, I used Post-it notes to get the concept fleshed out.
I am a huge fan of the Post-it method.
on my bedroom wall. It looked kind of scary. But I had all these Post-it notes, and at the very top of this sort of pyramid of Post-it notes was create the concept, and then you'd have to find a place to put it, meaning create the show. And then the second tier was find distribution, find a place, a home for the show. I pitched the Food Network. And just a funny story, I had a really lovely meeting with the Food Network in Chelsea in New York. And I had at that time a pilot for the show. They said, we really love this. This is really good, really great production value. They said, the only problem is there's not enough food in it. And we're the Food Network. and they said to me, we really love this show. This is like a news program. This belongs on like PBS or CNN or something, which makes sense, right? Because my background is news, that this would have a newsy feel to it. And so that actually helped. I took every meeting that I had with people because I had no idea. Creating a television show from scratch, I had no idea what I was doing. Every meeting that I had, and I had so many meetings with really amazing people, talented people, people in the industry, I would always try to get something, learn something from that person. I never looked at it as rejection. I looked at it, what can I learn from their feedback? And right now, it is currently on public television. This is the third season of the program, To Dine For. And the PBS audience, the public television audience, is amazing. They really are a right fit for the content, which is, inspiring stories over delicious food. So all that to say, the home that I found has been a great one.
Wait, stop. Did you catch that? I never looked at it as rejection. How often does the fear of being rejected stop us from taking an action as a beginner who has no idea what we're doing? I mean, Kate may be selling herself a little short because she did know what she was doing in other contexts, but in this particular context, she was a newbie. And so those no's opened up the opportunity for her to learn, shift, and try again. Here is a show that you're producing in restaurants about food in conversation with people, and there's a pandemic.
Yeah.
Give me a little timeline about when the pandemic hit and it became apparent that this was going to be a huge problem versus where you were in your production schedule for the season.
Yeah, we're really just beginning, and we had to make a decision. Do we continue on carefully? Do we change our protocols, which we did drastically? We changed the way we did the whole show in the midst of this, or do we just stand down and not do a series? And my thought was, look at all these restaurants. Look at how they're struggling. Look at how they're devastated. Look at how hard they're working. They were working overtime to stay afloat. They were paddling like they'd never paddled before and trying to innovate. And to me, I thought that was, first of all, so inspiring, but also, that is why we should do the show. And that is to kind of capture this moment in time and to support them and to give them publicity and props. And so we did very carefully decide to proceed with the creating of season 3 of To Dine For, but it came with a lot of problems and issues and rescheduling. It was a great year. It was an inspiring year. It was a difficult year, but I think it reflects that in this season.
What have you observed from your vantage point and from these conversations and knowing what you do about the restaurant industry? I'm thinking about not only how the businesses have been struggling during this time, but also the concept of the third place, how we have home, we have work, and then we have the third place, which is like the place where we gather, where we hang out, where we socialize, that is part of our identity. So what you were saying, right, about like your favorite restaurant is part of your identity. And while maybe you can get takeout from that restaurant, and you have the benefit of the food and you're supporting them, there's something missing about the experience of being there with people, and being taken care of.
It's crushing. I completely agree. And I think, and I'm an introvert. I say, respect to all the extroverts out there. I completely agree. It's funny. I talked about the third place with Howard Schultz of Starbucks. He was the very first episode of season 1 of To Dine For, and we went to his favorite restaurant in Seattle, which was a Middle Eastern restaurant called Mamnoon. And he picked that restaurant because of the hospitality and the warmth you feel there. But we talked about the third place because his vision for Starbucks was to make Starbucks the third place. But the idea of the third place, a neutral place to gather, is so important. And I think that is why you're seeing, not the whole reason, but I think it's partially how we feel so isolated, lonely, where instances of depression, anxiety are really on the rise. And, people are really struggling.
Have you thought about what viewing your show might mean to your audience?
I'll be honest, one of the very clear intentions I have for the show is for people to feel different after they watch the program. For them to sit down, to have 30 minutes to be absorbed in the location, to be transported to this restaurant they probably have never been to, in another city they've never been to, or maybe they have, and to hear a different point of view, a different attempt at the American dream. It is a journey, and I want the viewer to come along with us as if they're a guest at the table, as if they're right there with us, learning what I'm learning. I approach every interview as a point of discovery, a conversation. I don't have written questions made out. I really want to be in the moment and really hear someone's story. So yes, I do hope in the midst of all of this, it is a little respite. It is a chance and a break. And I hope people remember what it was like to have a great conversation at a restaurant with someone we care about or someone interesting. Let's bring that back. Not that Zoom isn't great, but it is not the same. It is not the same as being there in person and reading body language and really connecting and feeling nourished when you walk away from a meal, not just from the food, but from what you learn from that person. And that's really what I want people to get out of the show and have that own experience for themselves.
Did you catch that? That's what I prompted you to pay attention to in the intro of this episode. Kate wants people to feel different after they've watched the program. And so I ask you, how are your listeners different at the end of your show? Where do you transport them while they're listening? And that brings me to our podcast angel, the Podcast Envy ProPod. If you have a hard time answering questions like I just asked you about your show and it got the wheels turning, then the ProPod membership is for you. Having conversations like this with Kate is like talking shop with a colleague, and I always walk away with new ideas and fresh perspective to bring to my show, and more importantly, the experience of what I'm offering through my show. When you become a member of the ProPod, we'll be able to go in deep on topics like this one. Besides our monthly Zoom sessions, you'll be able to request masterclasses from me on topics like this that you just cannot get anywhere else. Because not everybody launching a new show in a free Facebook group is ready to give this kind of value to their listeners. Membership in the ProPod is $99 per month or $79 per month when you sign up in advance for the year ahead. We are waiting for you in order to get started. Click the link in the show notes to apply or book a 20-minute online podcast tea date with me to see if the ProPod is right for you at thecreativeimposter.com/T420. That's TEAFOR20. Okay, a little bit of behind the scenes of producing the show. Mm-hmm. This is my own personal curiosity in terms of production.
Yeah.
Is there anything particularly that you do to put your guests at ease? Because I have to be honest, I'm thinking about eating a meal in front of somebody who you don't know, even having a first date with somebody and being at a restaurant, eating food in front of someone you don't know that you're met for the first time. Now, with your show, you've added that there's a camera and lights on you.
Cameras.
3 cameras, yes. Bright lights on you while
Sometimes
you're eating.
4.
And while you're being asked questions, so you need to speak.
First of all, I go into it wanting to eat, and I'm ready to eat. And, this is my passion, right? Food and restaurants. And so for me, I've had to sort of let go of being self-conscious on camera because this is the dream, right? And, having someone enjoy the food that they have chosen as their favorite restaurant is paramount. So I try to give a lot of opportunity for them to eat. There are some guests who dive in and love it, but that's not always the case. You have a lot of people who are self-conscious, even, really well-known people, and that's okay too. My goal is 2 parts: to hear the story of why they love the restaurant and then to hear their story. And if I feel like they really told their story, then that's a win for me. That's a success. I think it's part of what you bring to the table as an interviewer, as a journalist, as a conversationalist, as a person. I don't think icebreakers or anything like that is going to work as much as being a person who is curious and cares. I think those 2 qualities, being curious and really caring, can set people at ease more than anything else in the world. I recently did a podcast with someone who never looked at the camera once. I could tell was running out of time, really wasn't fully engaged. It's an emotional connection you have with someone, whether you're on a Zoom call or whether you're in person. And you can feel it. I will say this too. You can only meet people as deeply as they've met themselves. And so when I do an interview, I try to throw out any sort of expectations of the interview that I want to have and really try to meet someone where they are in that moment, in that second. And some people are really amazing at meeting me there too. And some people stick to a script. And my job is to make them feel comfortable enough to deviate from that script. And that usually doesn't happen till after the food. But I will say the whole point of the show is part of what you're saying. Someone's favorite restaurant is the beginning of their story. It's on their turf. It's who they are. The whole point of the restaurant is to make someone feel comfortable. The whole point of doing it at the restaurant is to make for a better story, to make for a better conversation. So, what am I doing? The entire premise of the program is to bring them to a place of comfort where they feel that they can tell their inspiring story.
All right, y'all, real talk. The job of an interview host is not as easy as you may think. Many people think that doing interviews is the easiest way to make a podcast. And in some ways, it just may be, but it is not the easiest way to make a high quality show. There is a definite art to putting your guest at ease, and part of that is who you are. Part of that is being an amazing listener. Part of that is being, as Kate says, curious and caring. And then there's the whole experience that you create. So again, I ask you, what experience are you creating for your guests, your listeners, and yourself? Where does the podcast To Dine For fit into this whole ecosystem? How did that come to be?
Well, it started with the pandemic. And right around March, I started to panic. I said, how am I going to get this off the ground? How am I going to continue on? And the future for everyone, I don't know if you remember back in March, how different we felt about things.
Seems like a lifetime ago.
Yeah, like even going to a grocery store was stressful, right? So I thought to myself, why not create a podcast which could be, at the time, Chicago restaurants were open. I said I could make it really Chicago-centric with a lot of Chicago fascinating, inspiring people at their favorite restaurant. And if I can never get on a plane, I could do To Dine For Chicago version. And my thought was, if for some reason restaurants closed down in Chicago, I could do it virtually, in that we could talk about someone's favorite restaurant, but the conversations could continue. So To Dine For the podcast started as my way of pivoting in the pandemic, of trying to create and continue to do what I love, which is telling these amazing stories. And how do you do that? And so I started it as a 40 episode. I committed to a 40 episode podcast. And we have started in September, and it's been amazing. And yes, we've highlighted a lot of really amazing Chicago stories, like Alpana Singh, the sommelier and restaurateur, Jamal Cole of My Block, My Hood, My City, Robert Passon of Radio Flyer. But we've also done a lot of amazing virtual interviews. T.D. Jakes, America's Preacher, down in Dallas, Texas. And we took a lot of the previous episodes of To Dine For and created podcasts out of them, and did extended conversations like we did with M. Night Shyamalan out of Philadelphia at Vetri Cucina. What an incredible interview he was, talking about creativity and how do you stay fresh and how do you stay inspired. And how does he, after all of his years in filmmaking, how does he stay inspired? So it's been a great venture, and we hope to continue it in 2021.
How are you feeling personally about these big picture decisions? I feel like there's still a lot of uncertainty of how things are going to be in 6 months or a month or 8 months. And so I know that a lot of people in different industries are hesitant to put together a plan or have a vision for what things are going to be, not knowing what is going to be. How are you navigating that?
It's an interesting time. I think there's a great quote, you never let a crisis go to waste. Meaning, in the midst of uncertainty, when there is this kind of situation of not knowing what to do, you realize that the majority of people aren't doing anything. So there's an opportunity there to do something. And for me, that's how I kind of navigated the pandemic and creating this show in restaurants during COVID, is to step by step carefully move forward safely, and to keep the vision of what To Dine For is all about at the center, which is telling these incredible stories and shining light on amazing restaurants. So it's sort of like whatever you're doing in life, whatever your creative venture, if you can fall back to your why. Why did you get started? Why are you doing what you're doing? And even constantly re-examine that, because sometimes we lose sight of that. It's really easy. I think I've found it's really easy to lose sight of why you got started, of why you're doing it, because there's so much coming at you negative. And if you were to say, no one's really making a plan, so, what's the point? Then you wouldn't move forward, right? You wouldn't get anything done. So you kind of have to move forward. And this is true even in not a pandemic, because a pandemic gives you something tangible that's uncertain. It's absolutely uncertain. But life without a pandemic is uncertain. So even when you're making a plan, a clear vision, and trying to move forward, not in a pandemic, you still are risking it all, because anything could happen that could change it up. It's the same thing out of a pandemic as in a pandemic. It's not exactly the same, but do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The uncertainty and fear.
It's like a fallacy. It's like,
it is. Yeah. It's a facade. Life is uncertain.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know day to day what's going to happen, even in the best of times. So if you can kind of come from that perspective, that life is always going to be uncertain, and that you have to just move forward the best you can. You're going to make mistakes, but to try to keep why you started at the forefront of your mind, that's really all you can do, in my perspective.
Remember why you started. One of the ways that I know something is true is when I hear more than one person say it, especially in a short period of time. We heard it in our conversation with Cassandra Dunbar. And that's how I always start my conversations with aspiring and new podcasters, with organizations and companies who want to have a show, and in strategy sessions with longtime podcasters. Why are you doing this? What is going to keep you going even when you want to quit? Because let's face it, there's always that moment where we want to quit. Why did you start? Why are you doing it? What is going to keep you moving forward? So for our listeners of Podcast Envy, who are podcast producers, content creators, in some cases interviewers, is there anything else that comes to mind that you would want to share with them at this time?
You have to love it. Find something about it to really love. I think the best podcasts or the best artists, the best content creators, the people who really stand out, really love what they do. And if you don't really love it, that's okay. Just to be honest with yourself and find something else that you really love, or find another way to do it that you really love. I think we sometimes sacrifice, or sometimes we think things have to be either or, but they can be and. You can love it and do it the way you want to do it.
Podcast Envy is produced by your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder. That's me. The Podcast Envy theme music is by Valentin Sosnitsky, courtesy of the Free Sound Project at freesound.org, and our podcast Angel music is by Benjamin Mastropolito, also on freesound.org as Lemon Cream. All music is licensed under the Creative Commons. Our episodes are mixed by Edwin Ruiz, and hey, if you want your show to sound as good as ours, hire us. Put the magic audio mojo of the Creative Imposter Studios to work for you. Thanks so much for listening, and here's to making your podcast the envy of everyone else.